What's up, guys? It's your boy SimoneFan101 here, and today we are going to be looking at yet another Star Wars movie. Today we're going to be looking at kind of an anomaly of pretty much every Star Wars film. Star Wars The Clone Wars, released in 2008. Now, this is of course part of Star Wars Mania, and I'm just say right now, looking back, it's like, man, after Episode 3, that must be it for Star Wars, right? Of course, you would have video games, books, comics, maybe even TV shows and whatnot. But as far as the movies, I think they're done. And this was before the idea of an Episode 7, 8, and 9 really came to fruition. But in the interim between Episode 3 and Episode 7, we had Star Wars The Clone Wars, released in 2008. This was, of course, preceding the Clone Wars TV show that would... It had a rough start, but would eventually become beloved among the fan base. Now, how this movie came about is kind of interesting. Basically, what happened was, the Clone Wars TV show was going to be created no matter what. Whether this movie was a hit or it was a failure, a success or a failure, whether or not that was going to happen, the TV show was going to be a thing. That's just a fact. Now, the problem is, well, not the problem, but what happened was George Lucas, he witnessed the early episode footage from the Clone Wars and said, why not make a movie out of this? There's enough excitement here and enough here to keep going that, okay, let's make a movie. And he had it was his idea to make this into a full-length feature film. So what they did was Dave Filoni, who previously to this had directed several episodes of Season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and would later on be one of the principal people behind both the Clone Wars TV show and Star Wars Rebels. Clearly, this guy he's got his hands in the trenches at Lucasfilm. In terms of the animation department. So what Dave Filoni did was he wove together several episodes that were already created, probably added a few more scenes to make it, mesh well better as a feature film instead of obviously a few episodes, and they basically had a movie, edited together and everything. They had a movie. How does it work out? Ooh, not so good. Not so good. So, let's get into the details, shall we? Dave Filoni, as I said, he was the main principal. He was the director of the movie. The producer of the movie was George Lucas, of course. This was actually the last Star Wars movie George Lucas would ever have any real involvement in. And Catherine Winder. I don't know who Catherine Winder is, and I really don't care. And in the screenplay, there were 3 screenwriters for this movie. There was Scott Murphy, Stephen Melching, and Henry Gilroy. For Melching and Murphy, there is no track record whatsoever. and Henry Gilroy, despite seemingly being, having an extended career, but there's not a whole lot about him. Like, there's no list of shows. There's several things he's done that he's been involved in, which you think this would be big pluses. Batman the Animated Series, the Justice League cartoon, did a couple of direct-to-video movies such as Atlantis: Milo's Return, and also would go on to be the main co-writer for the Clone Wars TV show, as well as the co-executive producer for the Star Wars Rebels. Now, what makes... So you got people who know this stuff, and eventually created a very beloved TV show. But again, it doesn't work out. Okay, I'm getting through all the details now. I got to get through the plot here. The plot is as simple as it can be. Supposedly, it's a few months after the events of Episode 2, and And despite the only taking place a little while after Episode 2, all the characters in the movie, the characters that we know of, look like how they would look in Episode 3, with a few differences, of course. But yeah, they looked like the way they did in Episode 3, and yeah, that's pretty distracting. And it's also just weird. It's supposed to take place in between the events of Episodes 2 and 3, but there are some details, like I said, that kind of contradict the movies, including the prequels, which they're so closely connected. I mean, for example, Anakin has... He's got his darker look, sort of, than like he does in Episode 3. He's got the scar by his eye. His hair is very different. He's already a Jedi Knight. We never see how he became a Jedi Knight. He already is. And his arm is no longer the golden arm that's shown at the end of Episode 2. It's the black-gloved arm that we see in Episode 3. So, yeah. Obi-Wan has shorter hair in terms of actually what's on his head. His beard is more defined. Much like it is in Episode 3. So, yeah, like I said, several details. But that's not the only inconsistency with this movie. So, what's the plot? Anakin and Obi-Wan are on a planet called Christophesis, which they're already engaged in the middle of battle. How do they engage in this battle? If you didn't watch the Clone Wars show, you have no idea why. And I'm watching, even though I'm a big fan of the Clone Wars show, I am reviewing this as a movie, not as a show. And therefore, I have to accept it as that. So, about 5-10 minutes into the movie, at most, a ship comes in to help to send a message to Anakin and Obi-Wan by a youngling called Ahsoka Tano, who in this movie is played by Ashley Eckstein. By the way, Matt Lanter plays Anakin Skywalker, and James Arnold Taylor plays Obi-Wan Kenobi. Taylor, in case you're wondering, also played Kenobi in the old 2003 animated TV show that was also called Star Wars: The Clone Wars. So they're on the Battle of Christophesis, and with some help from Ahsoka, they eventually win. Although when she arrives on the planet, it was said that she is to be assigned to be Anakin Skywalker's Padawan. Anakin, of course, doesn't know this because it was supposed to be Obi-Wan getting a new Padawan, not Anakin. And yeah. And Yoda, of course, is a dick for saying that, oh, you're Anakin's Padawan learner. Yeah, Yoda is kind of a dick, isn't he? So, there's that. You have the back and forth between Anakin and Ahsoka, which is annoying. And both of them come across as either annoying or disrespectful, or dicks. So, yeah. Okay, so after the battle... Okay, continuing on. After the Battle of Christophesis, you could tell, like, there were some moments in this movie where I was tormented. You could tell that after the... that I'm not looking forward to this. After the battle, Yoda arrives, with backup because they were in desperate need of backup. And this was a plot point from the very beginning. They tell Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka that Jabba the Hutt's son has been kidnapped. Where the hell was Jabba the Hutt's son in Return of the Jedi? Who the fucking knows? They pulled this plot out of their ass. Anakin and Ahsoka specifically are tasked with rescuing the little Huttlet, while Obi-Wan goes to Tatooine to discuss with Jabba over a treaty in order to use trade routes. So that way the Republic can move in and out of Jabba's territory without any repercussions. Anakin and Ahsoka find the little Huttlet on the planet called Teth, where they are they are attacked by the droid army led by Count Dooku's apprentice Asajj Ventress. If you have not watched the 2003 animated show, you have no fucking idea who Asajj Ventress is, and that is yet another inconsistency. They don't give a true introduction to the character. Hell, they don't even call her Asajj. They strictly call her by her last name, Ventress. And through their battle, they discover that the plan, and of course the audience discovers that the plan is for Ventress she kidnapped the Huttlet, and their idea is to make it look like the Jedi were the ones that kidnapped the little baby Jabba the Hutt's son, and try and frame the Jedi, and that way Anakin and Asajj Ventress and Dooku would look good, and that way they'd be able to use Jabba the Hutt's trade routes freely by returning the son themselves back to Jabba the Hutt. Of course, shit goes wrong, battles ensue. Obi-Wan eventually comes back and fights alongside whatever, clone battalions that Anakin and Ahsoka brought with them. And during all this, Anakin and Ahsoka escape. They go to Tatooine, and they're on their way, and they get crash landed due to their ship being shot down. And they have to travel across the Dune Sea in order to get the son back to Jabba. Meanwhile, during all this, and by the way, this part of the plotline is in the last 20 minutes of the movie. I shit you not, I'm saying that right now. This movie's about an hour and a half long. This movie is a little over an hour and a half long. This plot point is introduced literally in the last 20 minutes. Padme Amidala, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Anakin has a wife in this. Yeah, boy did they throw her to the wayside. But Padme learns about the mission, and she goes to Zero the Hutt, who apparently is Jabba's uncle, and lives on Coruscant. Zero refuses to cooperate with her in whatsoever to help her out. And it's later discovered that Zero is, of course, behind the plot of his nephew's son's kidnapping. And he's in line with the Separatists, including Count Dooku. In fact, he has direct contact with Count Dooku. After this is discovered, it's not too long where Padme she's detained, but only briefly, when she gets a message through 3PO, and thanks to that, the clones arrive and they arrest Zero the Hutt. Meanwhile, back on Tatooine, Anakin and Ahsoka, they have to travel across the desert, as I said. Anakin clearly is pressured to talk about his past. He doesn't want to talk about it. This plot point is never brought up again in the rest of the movie. Yet another plot point not needed. So Anakin devises a plan. While he will carry the package, because there's like a pack that they're wearing that'll carry the little Huttlet. He uses it as a diversion to attack Dooku while he carries an empty pack, while Ahsoka carries the baby to Jabba's palace. But of course she's stopped and has to fight the Magna Guards. You're probably wondering, where the hell is General Grievous if there are Magna Guards here? General Grievous is not in this movie. Yes, the Magna Guards are supposed to be one of the trademark droids for General Grievous, and yet Grievous himself is not in this movie. Yet another inconsistency that just does not make sense. Yeah, it just doesn't work right. And of course, the idea, after Ventress clearly I am just blown, I really don't want to talk about this movie, but I have to for you guys. After Ventress, this was earlier in the movie, I forgot to mention, I really don't want to talk about this, I want to forget this movie. After Ventress loses to Obi-Wan, because she does engage in a lightsaber duel with Obi-Wan, they devise a new plot in that Jabba the Hutt's son was killed by the Jedi, and when Anakin and Ahsoka will get to Jabba the Hutt, they themselves will be killed, but because of not having the little Huttlet with them. Ahsoka defeats the Magna Guards. He brings the baby in before they can kill Anakin, because Anakin got there first, thanks to a speeder stolen from Count Dooku. And thanks to Zero the Hutt's confession that he was indeed behind the kidnapping along with Dooku, Anakin and Ahsoka are allowed to live. Backup seemingly finally arrives, too fucking late. And we end our movie with the clones and the Republic able to use Jabba's trade route. Where do I begin? Where do I begin with this movie? First of all, the plot. Plots for the previous Jedi films have been either somewhat complicated or pretty simple and easy to follow. This movie's plot is so fucking weak. I'm like, really? All this for this movie is basically a rescue the kidnapped kid mission with the with a movie title that sounds like Star Wars. Man. It's just it's really not that. I don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say. I've always had something to say about the other movies. This movie is not one of them. This movie is in many ways bland and forgettable. Except for the fact that it's the only one that's fully rendered CG animation. It's not live action. It's not even a 2D cartoon. Fully rendered movie. Yeah, the plot is weak. Also, they could use a fucking trade route. At least the previous Star Wars movies had some weight. Episode 1 was about a planet takeover. Episode 2 was about a separation from the Republic and an oncoming civil war. Episode 3 was about how the Civil War ended and how everything went to shit, and how the Republic was destroyed and replaced by the Empire. Episodes 4, 5, and 6 was about the struggle against the Empire and the rebellion struggle just to survive and defeat them. This movie is about a fucking trade route. That was so stupid. Okay, so weak plot aside, how's the rest of the movie? The writing of the movie is not exactly strong. There's a couple moments here and there where are pretty good when it comes to humor, but mainly with the droids. But aside from that, it's just not. It's a weak script. There's nothing really for any of the characters to really chew on in this movie, except for Zero the Hutt, who's the only really legitimately enjoyable character in this movie, and he's only in it for maybe 5 minutes max. He's only introduced in the last 20 minutes. Not a lot of time for character development. And yeah, speaking of plot and script, the plot points. Anakin's struggle with his past on Tatooine. Never brought up again after a certain point. There's no point in having it being there. The whole Zero the Hutt Padme Amidala thing is completely unnecessary. You could have cut them out of the movie, and nothing would have changed. Honestly, it probably would have made the movie flow a little better. You have just the constant fighting, and again, the weakest plot point of any Star Wars movie. I mean, my God. And speaking of the fighting, let's get to that. Let's get to the animation. First, the models. The models themselves for the droids, aliens, and even some of the clones, specifically when they're only in their armor, you don't see their faces. They actually look pretty good. It's really the human characters that really take a back seat. I mean, these models look completely, off-model. I mean, for example, the bridge of both Anakin Skywalker's and Count Dooku's noses are above their eyes. It is freaky to look at. Like I said earlier, the characters look like how they do in Episode 3, and mainly Anakin and Obi-Wan. And they should not look like that. They should look like somewhat similar to how they look in Episode 2. Anakin's golden arm, his shorter hair. He should be a Padawan if there's only a few months after the events of Episode 2. And that's what I said earlier when I said that this movie has major inconsistencies with the rest of the movies, especially the prequels, because it's like they're ignoring certain details at the end of one movie and the beginning of another. They're just choosing one movie entirely for their looks. No evolution in the looks of the characters. It's just they go straight to the models of Episode 3. That is distracting, especially if it's only a few months after Episode 2. It's like, what the hell happened in that few months? We'll never know. At least we won't ever know if you never watched the 2003 animated show by Genndy Tartakovsky, a much better show than the 2008 one. I love the 2008 show, but the 2003 was a lot simpler, easier to understand, and showed more of the actual Clone Wars. And yeah, speaking of which, let's talk about that. This movie's called Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Not many clones, not many wars. Okay, I take that back. Wars in the beginning of the movie. In the middle of the movie, it's all skirmish fighting. And while there are clones in this movie, the only clone with any discernible character is Rex, who would go on to have his own character later on in the Clone Wars TV show, as well as Star Wars Rebels. But later in the TV show, they did a much better job with the clones. In this movie, they don't. Rex is the only character with any sort of depth, and even then, it's not that much. Only that he has a strong loyalty to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Speaking of, there's that. The clones don't really matter in the grand scheme of things of the story. They're needed when they're needed, but this is mainly a Jedi-centric movie. And it's just not that well done when it comes to the clones. They really hurt them. And speaking of, I said earlier of characters, there's not much in the way of character development. All the character development we get is between Anakin and Ahsoka. And even then, Ahsoka is annoying. Granted, Ahsoka later on becomes a great character, but man, she did not have a good start. Her character comes across as annoying. Anakin's character comes across as kind of dickish. Yoda comes across as dick for not telling Anakin that, hey, you're getting a new Padawan, and to tricking him into believing that Obi-Wan's getting the Padawan. Several of the good guys come across as kind of dickish in this movie, and it's really not well done at all. Now let's get into what I think is the biggest problem with this movie. That is the animation itself. Like I said, the models were not good, but the animation itself is can also be pretty bad. It's lacking. It's lacking any sort of weight to them. Characters move around. Oh, should I say the Jedi characters move around way too floaty. They're way too like I said, they're way too floaty. They can jump far distances without seemingly any effort whatsoever. They're like giant superheroes, but they're not supposed to be. Jedis could do amazing things in the prequel trilogy, but like high jumps and stuff, but they could only do it in certain ways. In this movie, they make the Jedi way too, acrobatic and powerful. I mean, sometimes they should be acrobatic, but at other times, it just seemed really off. I take, for example, the beginning of the movie. There's a scene where Anakin is jumping onto a giant droid from a long distance. Now, Obi-Wan did this in Episode 3, but he was doing it on a giant platform. Anakin was jumping onto a giant moving droid. And on top of that, he jumped off of it, sliced through a leg like it was nothing, felt no impact, and then jumped several feet, almost like a couple stories in the air to kill another droid, seemingly. Like I said, it was lacking any sort of weight. It didn't look believable. It looked way too animated. Which, I get it. The movie's animated, but you gotta have certain boundaries. This movie didn't have any boundaries. And watching the movie, it also didn't help. Sorry. It also didn't help that watching the movie, if you watch the movie from beginning to end, there are several scenes where the animation doesn't look completed. It doesn't look fully rendered. And I can only assume some of these were because of the last-minute changes that were made from making it a TV show into a movie. And it really shouldn't surprise you. The budget of the movie was $8.5 million. Animations, and keep in mind, this was around the same time, either the same year or a year before that Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs came out, which had stellar animation. This movie didn't have that. This is the same year that Princess and the Frog came out. That had stellar animation. This movie failed as an animation. It had dull animation. Some of its animation wasn't even fully rendered. The fact that the characters at times looked like Play-Doh Yeah, granted they would look better in the TV show, but in the movie it doesn't work that way. It looked like Play-Doh. It didn't look right, especially mainly for the main characters. With that said, are there positives to this? Well, yeah, the voice acting itself is decent enough, especially from a couple of the people, especially from Christopher Lee, who plays Count Dooku. And this is the only time Christopher Lee would actually play the animated role of Dooku. He would go on to be played by a different actor in the TV show. Samuel L. Jackson came back as Mace Windu during the brief scene or scenes that he was in. And this movie did have a couple good voice doubles, such as Tom Kane as Yoda. Tom Kane did a pretty good job as Yoda. James Arnold Taylor, I think, did a good job as Obi-Wan. And I also thought that Nika Futterman, I believe her name was, did a pretty good job as Asajj Ventress. And while I really didn't like the animation and models for the main characters, main human characters, I did like the ones for the droids and the clones. But, except for, and even the aliens, except for Jabba. Jabba looks like shit. I'm gonna say that right now. Jabba in this movie looks like complete shit. And, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't look right. So, what's my rating on this movie? After all the shit that I gave it, I gotta give it... This is by far the least favorite of the Star Wars movies that I've seen thus far. That I've gone back to rewatch thus far. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10. Why do I give it a 3 and not seemingly a 1? Well, for a couple reasons. One, it did spin off into a beloved TV show, so there's that. 2, I can't discredit the voice acting, which there is some legitimately good voice acting in this movie. And 3, the third reason why I give it, so yeah, 1 extra point for the voice acting, and another extra point for the fact that it spun off into a TV show, and the fact that, that there was some animation here that was decent. But yeah, the lack of good plot, the plot point with Zero the Hutt that was introduced in the last 20 minutes of the movie, the several plot points that were either ignored or are not significant in any way, and all these problems with the animation, the models, the characters, the writing, the small good points it has, the voice acting cannot save this movie. I'm giving this movie a 3 out of 10. That's that. With that said, I'll see you guys next time when I review the first movie by Star Wars Disney, Star Wars Episode 7 Force Awakens. I'll see you guys next week. Until next time, guys, peace.